I've been preaching and teaching in the church. One of my passions, one of my great passions is to ensure that this is passed to the next generation and that it does not become a one-man show. That truly we would have as many of us extensively study holiness. Kenya Highlands University has tried all these years to get me to teach here, but they have never. Because it had never come to a time when I felt my energies would be expended rightly. So yesterday morning I packed, ready to come, but then we had management, and I needed to do management and come, but my pack and everything was already in the vehicle. And as we were monitoring the situation in Nairobi and completing management, my colleague said, maybe you can stay and then go tomorrow. But when we finished management, I felt I can't stay because my mind had said go. So we came through Bong, Suswa Road, Narok, found Narok, the stones were still lying on the streets. We turned into my Narok, then of course spent the night at home in that. So I'm here, and you're also here. There were also logistical challenges. I think the seminary leadership have been trying to tell you about some of those. There are some people who are struggling to come for this. I actually thought that because I really had to make some sacrifices to teach online, the original intention was that I would come here for a block of 1 week, where 1 day is equivalent to 8 hours of lectures. That will complete in 5 days the 40 hours. Then now you do the rest of the work by yourself. I believe this is a good number. The unfortunate thing is that people who don't come, 3 days of 8 hours of lecture means that you have lost half a semester. So it may not be tenable to continue in the class, and maybe the leadership here will figure out what to do. So I really welcome you. I really welcome you to this class. I call for your attention and deeper reflection of the things that we will be learning over the next 3 days. I am a strong believer as a part of my commitment to the message of holiness in an ethical behavior when it comes to handling academics. I think many of you who have heard me speak in various forums, whether in media or in graduations or in church. I am very passionate that if you purpose to do academics, do it properly. And church academics are not meant to be simplified. In fact, the excellence of everything should begin from the household of faith. So one of the things that the message of holiness anyway teach you is to think and reflect deeply on what are my ethics as a church leader? What are my mannerisms that ensures that I am respecting due processes as a reflection practically of what it means to live a holy life? And it includes how you handle a class. This kind of an arrangement of a seminar which is flexible, where you study on your own, you enter the class online. Sometimes you come to class, I'm now seeing faces I didn't know I have in this class. Sometimes you enter a class, you put that dark screen and you don't know who is behind there. You only see techno something. But you see pastors, good or bad pastors. Holiness is what you do when nobody sees you. How that plays itself deep into your life and your ethics, even when nobody is around you. even when that screen is not showing your face. So if there is anything that I would call on us as we engage in this, is that we will be very ethical and really purpose through the transformative message of holiness from the Word of God, that what we do, how we behave, whether it is this class or any other class, that we will purpose to do the best in academics and also spiritual. That is the only way we will redeem the church and from all kind of unethical and unbiblical practices that we see today amongst the people of God. So, my good friends, I just want to welcome you, and I'm glad you're here. Maybe now I can know people. Yeah. And I am sure there's still some who are traveling, they're on the way coming. This class has more than 40 students. I see a number of faces that are familiar, but there are others that may not make it. So I leave the provost to figure out how they will deal with that. So Karibuni, we will want to start, but let's begin by introducing ourselves. I think you all know me. You can go this line, Misho, we come this way, then that way, then back this way, and then back up Misho. What's up?
Yes, I'm Reverend Mike Mutai, pastoring in the Westwood HC from Bonet County. Yes.
Mike Mutai, thank you. Yes. Let me say.
I'm the Ezekiel son, senior pastor in Singapore County, Kericho County.
Thank you, Ezekiel. Of course, I know you.
Yes.
Maybe there are some who don't know you. You and I belong to the old Temer generation. Next.
This is Joseph Pastor, Joseph Mashachi from Narok, studying among the Master's education.
Wonderful. We were in Leshuta on Sunday with this pastor, launching a new area. These are the people who are in the plains of Masters are really preaching the gospel. Pastor Mashati. Next.
My name is Pastor Linda.
Linda.
Associate Pastor, Pioneer AGC.
Oh, wonderful. That was Reverend Ron.
Yes.
You said Linda?
CTNA.
Yes. Very good. Barikiwa sana Linda. Thank you. Good to see you. Next.
I'm Isaiah Cheriot Mutai. Pastor, I'm a district leader, Kapsoyo district.
District leader, Kapsoyo.
Yes.
District. Isaiah Mutai. Thank you, Isaiah. Next.
I am Jelana Shalom.
Shalom.
Yes.
Salome or Shalom? Shalom.
Yes.
Shalom.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
From Sisnara area, Mulot Central, ADC.
Oh, we were with this one on Sunday, the other Sunday now. Yes, it's my area.
Yes.
Very good. Very diligent holiness student. Yes.
Yes, Timothy Kamirut Chemen. I serve with UDM.
Timothy?
Kamirut Chemen from Kitale, but I'm serving with University Discipleship Movement here in Kericho. Yeah.
UDM is not a political party. University Discipleship Movement. And that's Camille?
Timothy.
Yes. So where are you stationed now, Timothy?
Here in Kericho.
Oh, you're in Kericho?
Yeah.
So you're working with Kabianga and all these
Yes.
Very good. Next.
Yeah, I'm David Lanitalayo from Samburu, Wamba, EBS.
Hey, David
Lanitalayo. 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 Lanitalayo.
Lena Talayo. What's the meaning of that name?
Somebody with silence.
Wow. Did the rest of the Samburu delegation know?
No, but I have one of my brother there.
How many of you?
Five.
Yeah, most of them are in the degree class.
Oh, they're in the
We are only
degree.
the two in masters.
You're the two of you in the masters.
Yes.
And you made it okay.
Yeah.
It's nice to come to Kericho. You go back to Samburu on Saturday or on Sunday, and you take have you been to Kericho before?
Yeah, I studied degree here.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was here for my degree.
Oh, you did your degree here?
Yes.
And your friend?
This is my first time actually.
Your first time to be here? Wow.
I came on 5th actually to report for
Yeah.
my admission. So this is my second time.
Your second time. But in this season of this seminary thing, it's your first time to come to Kericho.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a very nice country. It's like when God started creating the world. He did it right here.
I told my friends that I was in, it's like, I'm in a small area.
It changes your perspective. Anyone who has struggled outside this community, this country, I know it's a struggle to come, but you never regret. It changes your perspective. So then next.
I'm Reverend Bernard Nino.
Yes.
I'm a missionary at AGC, serving in the northern part of the Tana River, or Garissa.
Garissa, Tana River, Mado. Yeah. It was nice to be with you last 2 years ago. Next.
Yes, I'm Shirley Hillary from Kenya. I serve in the missions department.
Missions department, Shirley Hillary. Very good. You say,
Reverend Moses McLeod from AGC Northern Region.
Very good. Yes, Reverend McLeod is our regional director from that. He runs the whole world. Anything new. Yes.
I'm Reverend Joseph Lamat from Narok,
Yes.
serving as secretary of Narok Region, serving as the pastor in the local church.
Yes. It's a local church. Next.
City.
That is also another. How many regional directors are here? Yeah, two. These are the guys who seriously want to become bishops. and I believe you will. Yes. It's the two from the extreme end, south drift and north drift. Hapa katikati, wajamaa wanataka kwenda nyumbani. Next.
I'm Pastor Bernard Kamau from Nyandarua County.
Yes.
Pastoring God's Grace for All Nations.
God's Grace for All
Nations Church or Kalau Town. And also the director of education in the ministry.
With my good friend Pastor Simon.
Yes.
You're in where are you? Where are you station?
It's
Nyahururu.
Nyahururu. Yes.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
My good friend.
Yes.
These are those of you at AGC. I think Bill Johnson invests heavily in two ministries in Kenya, in AGC and GGFAN. And they're very good people, doing a lot of discipleship and making a difference not only in the room, but they also ended into Samburu. Actually, it was through GGFAN and Bill Johnson that we were able to establish the ministry that brings this man from Samburu. Where they're with Kisoto, Daniel, very good people. Yes, next. Oh, Mark, we get to Nance. John.
I'm Reverend Bruno. I'm on EGC Region Director.
AGC Jeptenya, huyu ni mzee wa chuma wa zamani. Next.
Reverend Robert Sila is a youth, AGC missionary in the north.
Wonderful. Yes. Also, you are also alumni of this school, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think it's only yourself and myself who have something in common. Because Tolbert, to give Tolbert to Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus, did the Asbury Exchange program. think I was the third in the line when that program started here at Kenya Highlands Bible College many years back. And Ezekiel Koech was a second. The first was this that lady Wanderi. Was somebody Wanderi. What was the other name?
David Wanderi.
David. So in this generation, he also.
Yeah, I don't really remember what number I am.
Yeah.
At least.
It
was to 2010.
Yes.
2009.
Yes, terrible. 2010.
Yes,
2010.
2009.
Yeah. Right. Good, Zacchaeus, and then here, Reverend.
Reverend Chuli from Narok, pastoring Holiness.
Very good. Thank you so much, Reverend. And then begin here.
Pastor Robert
Good.
Sylvester from Kikiremo AIC local church, Kikiremo DCC, Kikirion region.
Kikirion region. Yes. Very good. Yes. Okay, there's a Kikirion region within Kericho area.
Our area now, there is a bit difference between EGC and when it comes to those two area and with us, the area is on the topmost.
Yes.
With you, area comes the second.
Yeah.
The region is on top. So us is region and then area.
And then area.
The region.
Yeah. It always confuses me. Is it Pastor who?
Pastor Woods.
Yeah. And then
my name is Peter Barikiwa from Samburu County.
Peter Barikiwa. Samburu County. Okay.
I work there as the DCC chairman. I oversee actually the work in Samburu County. Also, I'm also the chairman of the Samburu County Uganda Division. So I work very closely with Bill. I'm answerable to all the funds and everything, even the scholarship here. I'm also concerned about it.
Wow.
So that's I work very closely with him.
Wow.
So I'm the chairman of that organization.
Wow. You're the chairman.
Bishop Maona.
We work all the time. Very closely. Wow. Bill loves AIC in Samburu. Yeah, Bill loves it very, very, very much. He's aging there. Sometimes I wonder. I hope the ministry in Samburu will become self-sustainable so that it will perpetually continue in the years ahead. Ngalo Vision.
Ngalo means 1,000.
1,000.
So he's trying to construct 1,000 churches in Samburu County.
In Samburu County. Yeah. How many have you? What's the achievement so far from the beginning of the vision?
There are now 835 churches.
835.
Yeah.
Wow. So getting close. More than 80%.
Yeah. We're now approaching 13 years since it was done.
Yeah. Wow. Good. Ngalo Vision. Next.
Jeffrey Otieno.
Yes, Jeffrey.
From Sierra County, Uja sub-county. I work with KSCF, Kenya Students Christian Fellowship.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm the regional coordinator.
Wow.
Kisumu and Sierra County.
Sierra County. Excellent.
It's my first time to be at this side.
Wow.
To be in Kenya Highlands University.
Wow. Welcome. Welcome.
I'm Reverend Edwin Shell from the Kenya area. I'm the assistant district leader of the Kenya district.
Edwin Shell.
Yes.
The Kenya district. Which district?
The Kenya district.
Kenya district. Very good. Last.
Okay. Davis Ruta, Donna Ruta from Keringe, Chebara local. I'm also an associate member of Focus Kenya. I can say I first saw you there 2023 making a keynote speech on Ezra conference.
Oh yes, at Kabarak.
Yeah. Maybe this is the second time.
Yeah.
I'm seeing you.
Very good. I think there's somebody who came in.
Yes. Yes, I'm Ben Kauria from Imani ATC.
Imani ATC. Assistant Pastor.
Assistant Pastor.
Karibu. Well, I want us to delve into the lectures because our time has run out. Where we are looking at the foundation of the development of the doctrine of holiness in the Old Testament. You are trained, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. So we'll pray at the end. And as I was traveling here, I kept thinking about how to simplify and what would be a paradigm and a framework you can use to all the things that you study in the Old Testament to figure out how they fit into the grand narrative of interpreting the holiness in the Old Testament from a holiness perspective. And there are a number of ways, but even in the New Testament, you can almost use the same. One is, we started at Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, where you see the complete transcendence and otherness of God. And that in that image of God, he created humanity. That this new creature, both male and female, was so distinct, like it had never been done before, and distinct from all the other creation. And I think, to me, if you, as you look at the Old Testament in entirety, the struggle of the Bible, or what God is wrestling, is the recreation of that image, the restoration of the bearing of the holy image of God. And you will read a lot of literature and so forth, but at the bottom of what God is intending to do with the sinful humanity is to restore back the original image. So that's one way of looking at it. So as you sweep through the book of Exodus, Leviticus, all these books up to the end of Old Testament, one, the intention is the renewal, the restoration, the bringing back of that image with which humanity was created. So that's one way of looking. The other way of looking, and then I want you, as you go along, as you listen to the lectures and as you study the Bible, and try to see if you can see that, is that there is something about holiness and imaging the image of God, where there is this vertical, when Adam was told, do not eat of that fruit. What God was doing was establishing in the altar of Adam a shrine, where none but God himself was supposed to be there. That is establishing a relationship with Adam. And as you read in Genesis, I think chapter 3, you realize that God used to come down and at the cool of the day walk with Adam. I don't know what the total theological and meaning that how that happened, how the whole transcendent God, the maker of the universe, would have an opportunity to walk in a garden with a human being. But that was an indication of the best intimacy. And only that could only happen because of holiness and the purity and the moral integrity that was inbuilt to the life of this man who could walk with God. Because subsequently you see, as you read through the Bible, that people began to fear the holiness of God. That it became to be something unapproachable. And yet, at the very foundation, man could walk closely with God. So that one paradigm you can use then is understand that holiness means a thorough relationship, an unending, a relationship that is unbroken vertically with God, that is a vertical holiness. And consequentially, in the Garden of Eden, it meant Adam would reflect that the way he cared for his wife. You remember how he described his wife? That was like the entire humanity. That was like his neighbor. Later on, the Bible talks about loving your neighbor as yourself. But now there are billions of neighbors, or billions of people in the universe. But in the first instant, it was only one person. And so you have to take the entirety of Eve as the entire humanity that provides a horizontal holiness, how you deal with your neighbor as a result of your vertical holiness, how you relate well with God in totality. So in simple terms, the way to understand the Old Testament literature and all everything else that is being said in the Old Testament is to understand that this is a question of how does a sinful humanity restore that holiness with God, and also in that process be able to restore the horizontal holiness. The vertical holiness is towards God, horizontal holiness is towards your fellow neighbor. So that's one way of simplifying so much literature that is in the Old Testament. The third way I would recommend is trying to study under every covenant. I think there were major 5 covenants we mentioned last time, from Noahic, Abrahamic, the Mosaic, all the way to the new covenant prophesied by the prophets. Every scheme of it is about holiness. How do we relate back with God? So those are the introductory statements I wanted to make. So keep thinking about that. In what I am reading, what is here that is pointing towards holiness towards God? And here, what is pointing towards holiness towards my fellow human beings? That will help you to understand. Because in the Old Testament, there is a lot. By the time we read the book of Leviticus, it's a whole lot of sacrificial system and holiness code, the laws that are being put there to regulate the life of the nation of Israel. It's just tremendous. And you can easily be lost in the midst of that forest. But the best way to summarize the whole forest you're seeing there is that it is all about how can a sinful humanity get back to a holy God, and from that holiness of relating well with God, be able to relate well both with this environment, but also relate well with fellow human beings. And that's why when Jesus says in the New Testament, thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and then says, and love your neighbor as yourself. It summarizes everything. In fact, it summarizes the sacrificial system. It summarizes the laws that we encounter in the Old Testament. So let's move to lecture number 3, which is priestly holiness. And again, I wanted to be clear to all of us that when you talk about priestly holiness, it is not a holiness that only belongs to the priest. But you'll find, nevertheless, God unveiling that himself within this context of priestly holiness. The priests, the likes of you and I, are so central. That's one thing I was reflecting also as I was coming this morning, that yes, this priestly holiness enacted within the sacrificial system that was orchestrated by the priests. Yes, it was the priests were the sender, but also it was meant for the masses. Because the priest appeared before God. The whole priestly infrastructure established in Israel were the people who stood before God on behalf of the people. Yeah. Later on, when we look at the prophetic holiness, it is more of the people who stood before the people on behalf of God. It doesn't mean those two holiness are distinct or different. It is just the other side of the same thing. Because before you stand before God's people as a prophet, pronouncing the message of God, you already had stood before God. So the same thing, before the priest ever stood before God, they have also not only stood before the people to know what the problem of the people are, but they themselves are also in the right positioning with God. Because you remember, if they were not right positioning with God, as they enter into the Holy of Holies, you know what happens. So there is this priestly holiness is both for the priest himself, but also it is priestly holiness meant for the masses. Because you did not stand there for only your sins, you also stood there before God for the sins of the masses. So distinguish that and be able to be very clear that it is not just priestly because it's a holiness for the priests, but it is for the masses. So this is holiness as understood and revealed around the altar of sacrifice and the temple worship in Israel. and that happens throughout the Old Testament. It's enacted in the days of Moses, but the priest will be a common feature of the history of the nation of Israel. The book of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers introduce priestly holiness with emphasis on being set apart, being separated, and dedicated to God. This is holiness exemplified in the priestly atonement rituals and the moral code given to Israel. The development of priesthood in Exodus, or begins in Exodus, you will remember the Passover blood. That at the very core of the redemption of Israel, or the end of their slavery in Egypt, was the shedding of blood. That's another very central theme. We will not probably spend a lot of time here, but most of you as pastors have read a lot about the sacrificial system and how central the blood was before any atonement could be done. It was central at the Exodus, Passover, moving out of the land of Egypt and crossing the Red Sea and the eventual crossing of the River Jordan to the promised land. The whole essence of Passover can be understood right within this priestly model of holiness, in that the blood was sacrificed for them to be able to move and get out of the land of Egypt into the promised land. Passover was passing over from slavery. Again, if you remember what we discussed about slavery, God had given his people a 7-day rest. And what happened because of sin are the chaos of work. Slavery in Egypt, in and of itself, is an indication of going back to the chaos of work and labor, hard labor, and labor that was painful rather than labor that was enjoyable. Work is blessed of God. But the problem with that, the slavery was an indicator in and of itself of how fallen the humanity, both those who were enslaving them, but also the nation of Israel was living in a life in the absence of the worship of God. So then the whole justification of the Passover, or rather the Exodus, moving out of Egypt, was that the people would worship God. It was meant to be a consecration. You remember also the setting of the firstborns apart. Again, all those types and images were meant to indicate the centrality of holiness and being set apart for the worship and the service of God. So the Mosaic covenant, after slavery, we enter into a period. How many covenants have we discussed so far? There was Noah, a righteous man, Noah, a righteous man in this situation. And that covenant that God made, and he said, I will never again destroy humanity with a mass of water. And then the Abrahamic covenant. What is central about the Abrahamic covenant? Huh? What happened? What do we know about the covenant between God and Abraham? Making a blessing to many nations. How was that covenant enacted? By faith. Obedience. Obedience. There was also sacrifices. There was a shedding of blood. There was even the sealing of circumcision. Circumcision also has the shedding of blood. So those are the two covenants we discussed. Now we enter into this era of priestly holiness, which brings about the Mosaic covenant more strong. The first time Moses encounters God in Exodus chapter 3, what did God tell him? Those of you have read Exodus 3? Maybe one person at a time.
He was told to remove his sandals because the place was holy.
He was told to remove his sandals or his shoes because where he was standing was holy ground. I believe it is likely to be the first time we encounter the word holy in the book of Exodus is Exodus chapter 3. Where was Moses? He was tending the sheep of his father Jethro, his father-in-law Jethro, and quite far away from anything godly. In fact, those of us who study the various segments of the life of Moses, that the past 40 years was in Egypt, and in that school, in the pharaonic school of thought, where he had gotten also very worldly in his thinking. There was no problem to rescue his people, but he had chosen to rescue his people his own way, not God's own way. And what follows is another 40 years in the wilderness. So where God is encountering him is the second portion of his 40 years. There are actually, I think, 3 40s in the life of Moses. The 40 years in Egypt, the 40 years in the Libyan wilderness, and the 40 years in the wilderness with the children of Israel. That's the end of his life. And the second 40 years is wondering, where is God? In fact, he had no idea that God would appear again to him. What he was going closer to see was this burning thing that never gets consumed. And it is within that period where God reveals himself. And the first thing he reveals himself as is a holy God. What we're talking here about, my good friends, is the centrality of holiness in all his revelation, whether it is Old Testament or New Testament. He reveals himself first instant, right in the middle of nowhere. There's a holy God in the wilderness of Midian. And it's very interesting also, he reveals himself as a holy God and tells Moses, it's actually kind of a paradox, because in a way, he wants to talk to Moses. He wants Moses to be close to him, isn't it? Okay. But he's saying, don't do what? Don't get then symbolically, as it would mean in the life of sanctification, he tells him, remove your shoes. Here to be free. And basically saying, you can get close, Moses. You can get intimate, Moses. But there are certain things that have to happen to your life before you can get here. And the next thing is God says to Moses, Moses, I'm the God of Abraham, I'm the God of Isaac, I'm the God of Jacob. And the whole I am, those statements of I am, that's the beginning actually of the name of God. When Moses begins to say, so who are you? If I go to those people to tell them that you're sending me, actually the words, those of you studying theology, know that that word I am, which is now Yahweh, which we have translated in our languages as Jehovah, it could not be said. It's a name in original Hebrew that could not be pronounced. He just told Moses, go and tell them the one who is the I am has sent you. What is very important in that moment is go back to Genesis again, where God reveals himself as completely other. Holiness is about the otherness of God, the one that is above the gods and the idols of our world. And that's the deep message that Moses is getting, relating to the God who is holy and the God who is completely other and is the God of Israel. This way he's reminding him that you've been serving Moses here under your father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. It is not like the priesthood of Midian. It is not like the idols and the gods of this world. This one revealing himself to you is the Holy God. I wanted to underscore that because you will also find through the priestly, but more prominently in the Isaiah's literature, the Holy One of Israel, repeatedly. The Holy One of Israel, repeated through and through. So here we encounter the word holiness, so that's the first time. And this was after that revelation, and I think I told all of us, my scholarship in holiness hinges strongly around holiness and missions. That as soon as God sanctifies an individual, he gives him a mission. He's always connected to our calling, to whatever mission that God is giving. Immediately after God had told Moses to remove his sandals and has revealed himself as a holy God, what does he say? I have heard. Okay? You remember that? Yes. I have heard the cry of my people, and I have come to save. But I am not coming in my two legs. I'm using the legs of Moses. I am sending you to go back. So this is now the beginning of the story of Exodus. Exodus meaning exiting Egypt and entering into the promised land. So the entire scheme of Exodus implies coming out from the power of sin, to a life of holiness. You don't come out for the sake of it. You come out of something to get into something better. So the whole struggle, again, you can call it a struggle between God and his people, is he brought them out of the land of Egypt to be distinct from the gods and the worship in Egypt, in order that they may be holy and worship the Holy One of Israel. But that didn't happen quite often. And then we go through cycles that we all know. The Exodus marked the crossing of, yes, the crossing of the Red Sea, the crossing the Jordan, and circumcision, which was rich in holiness symbolism, in marking out the Israelites as a holy nation. So, then they came to Mount Sinai, where they had a covenant with Yahweh. And you can read the whole of that portion in chapter 19 all the way to chapter 24 of Exodus. The enactment of the Mosaic covenant. I will give that as an assignment to you. My master students will read, you keep reading. So go read. By the time we read that section, in the interest of time, I will let you go read it. This is the covenant God established with the people of Israel in Mount Sinai after he led them out of Egyptian slavery. He gave them the law. And if I may ask you, the law that was given in Mount Sinai, in that portion of scripture, had how many commandments? You are Bible scholars. How many? 10. The 10 commandments can be divided into many parts. Part 1 deals with what? One person at a time. To be good student, you raise up your hand and give me time. Yes, there's the first portion.
The first portion is about God.
It's about God.
Yes.
The second portion is human. Is it man to man? Oh, yes. Yes, exactly. The first portion is how man relates to God. And the second portion is how man relates to, or rather, to be gender sensitive, how a human being relates with another human being. Do you remember the paradigm that I said you can use in everything you're dealing with in the Old Testament, and you will be able to find how it summarizes holiness? Can you see it in the Ten Commandments? That the first portion would deal with horizontal or vertical holiness. The second portion deals with what? Horizontal. Keep that in mind in all kinds of situations in the Old Testament. And you'll find that then you could just conclude the Old Testament is about holiness. It's about holiness, and it has the particular dimension on having that clean, pure relationship with God, which informs your pure relationship with fellow human. So you cannot be lost. It's right there in the Mosaic covenant. So meaning even in this covenant, we actually see holiness, right? In this covenant, it is just the problem with sometimes how we take the laws. We take them to be mere rules. In fact, by the time we reach the 21st century, we have told ourselves we can no longer follow the laws of the Old Testament. But if you're taking them to be just mere rules and more and more rules, you lose the ethical transformative character of the commandments of God. And that's why today many of us don't honor the Sabbath. Today, many of us have really no respect for all those other laws, talking about stealing, talking about not coveting your neighbor's property and all that. But we cannot do that and still maintain holiness. Because holiness is subsumed into that law. And even at this point in the Old Testament, many people say, well, maybe in the Old Testament they were meant to be just laws. It didn't have any transformative effect. There are many scriptures that you encounter in the Old Testament that even then, at that generation, were intended to be transformed. Not just ceremonial holiness, not just a position of holiness, that truly God intended for his people to be transformed from inside so that their outward relationships will be informed by that transformative love. That is revealed here in the book of Exodus 19 to 24. That this is the covenant God establishes with the people of Israel at Mount Sinai after he led them out of the Egyptian slavery. He gave them the law. And look at this law reveals a distinct relationship between Yahweh and his people. Vertical holiness is clear in the first part of this law, and horizontal holiness is clear in the second part. The historic failure of Israel and the cause for the various exilic, I hope you understand exilic, the various exiles. They went to exile a number of times. They sinned before God, they are driven into exile. They sinned before God, God lets another nation rule over them. That oscillation had everything to do with a people that God could not dwell with anymore. And he just let it be. But every time there was a restoration, every time there was a getting back to the government, then the people were ready to relate with God. It was always short-lived. Their land was meant to be a holy land. Today we talk very casually about Holy Land. In fact, the Holy Land in Palestine is the worst place to live on earth today. That is where people are bombing themselves in the Gaza Strip. I mean, there's so much that is going on in Israel today that you cannot imagine that it is Holy Land. They were to be a holy nation and to be a kingdom of priests. The presence and the glory of God was symbolized in the Mishkan. Mishkan is not far from the word Maskani in the Swahili. Hebrew and Swahili are so close. I mean, Hebrew and Arabic. Swahili is half Arabic, and Arabic and Hebrew are part of the Semitic languages of that world. Mishkan ni Maskani, tabernacle, mahali Mungu anakaa. And that also, the presence and the glory of God being in the midst of the nation of Israel. You remember that Moses was told to prepare a tabernacle, where the presence of God would be. And in fact, most of the laws that you hear Moses pronouncing, whether it is in Leviticus or in any other book within the Pentateuch, he is listening to God in the tabernacle. And he comes back to make those pronouncements to his people. The presence of God, that is another deep image of holiness. It takes you again back to Genesis, the cool of the day. God cannot be here when we are an unholy people. The presence of God. And you can bring down to our ministries. There are many ministries today because they lack holiness. The truthfulness of seeking God, where God will come in his glory and demonstrate himself in his power, where God is still answering prayers, where people are still being redeemed, people are still giving their lives to God, and young people are still listening to the mission of God, is lost because the glory of God is lost in the church. So the preparation of this tabernacle was intended for Moses to demonstrate the presence of God. But the presence of God is accompanied by his holiness. Right? From here, Moses set up an elaborate priestly order. Now, after the tabernacle was in place, you will find that a very elaborate priestly order. And actually, Moses, in a way, was almost acted like an archbishop of sorts. Because he would talk to God. God says, tell the sons of Aaron, the priests, order them to walk in this manner, this manner. This is how the sacrifices have to be. These ones have to be. So the enactment of this Mosaic covenant, it's Moses is the center of it, but he actually he's a political leader, but he is the one actually that put together the priestly order in Israel. Rituals and ceremonies were meant to teach the concept of being set apart from the secular and the prophetic. Sanctification and separation from sinful past is echoed throughout this portion of scripture. Before I get to Joshua and Judges, I want to skip this portion of self-confidence in the book of Judges and get to Leviticus. Leviticus is book number what in the Bible? Book number 3. That is after Exodus. So, if I can stop here and reflect back where we have come from, we've discussed patriarchal holiness, and that's where we find the Noahic and Abrahamic covenant. That is patriarchal holiness. And I hope you understand that a lot of what you see there are individuals, maybe with their families, individuals who walk with God. So there's a lot of language of being blameless, being righteous, it's more personal holiness. When you come into the Mosaic part, the priestly covenant, the nation has grown. And now you see a more elaborate system and the conceptualization of holiness is coming through at this portion where we are, the priestly, an entire sacrificial system, but it's also accompanied by laws. There is a priesthood which is intended for cleansing the people, that they would live a holy life. But there are also laws and regulations that govern what is being done, including the penalties and everything that goes with it. And the book of Leviticus, I think, is so central. It's book number 3. So if we had in Genesis the Imago Dei, and how there are men like Noah and Abraham who walk imaging that Imago Dei. By the time we are in Exodus, we do have the man whom God revealed himself in the midst of wilderness, that I am good. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac. And from there, he is to lead his people from slavery of sin, if you will, into a life of freedom, of living a holy life set apart for God. So then, and then in Exodus, we find the centrality of more central in Exodus is the covenant, the laws, the 10 Commandments, and all other associated laws. And we say God reveals himself in those laws in the book of Exodus as how to relate with him, how to relate with the others. Now, in the book of Leviticus, which is a further development of a priestly model of holiness, and I think actually the book of Leviticus is the quintessential, and it demonstrates holiness perhaps more than any other book in the entire Old Testament. In fact, if there's a book, as you read the Old Testament on holiness, if there's a book there are actually 2 books I highly recommend. And in fact, I may say, let me give you that as an assignment tonight. You are good scholars. Spend time and read the entirety of Leviticus. If you can, at least skim through. Be sure that in every chapter you are getting the themes of the book of Leviticus. The other book, but maybe for tomorrow, no, tonight, I think we'll read there by tonight, is the book of Isaiah. The book of Isaiah is the other holiness book. Those two, everything else in the rest of the minor or major prophets, and everything else in the Old Testament is a reflection of the theology of the two books. You get deeper into the book of Isaiah and get deeper into the book of Leviticus. Somebody should let me know when people go to chapel. It's not like online. You're cooking dinner and playing with children. After you figure noon, I listen. Remember that. The book of Leviticus, where was I? And Isaiah, those two books. Make sure you study them. Maybe tonight study Leviticus a bit more close. Tomorrow, do Isaiah. I don't expect a written assignment, but study them with a mind of holiness. Just to pick up the holiness themes that run through those two books. So Leviticus then explained the centrality of holiness in this book, and I guarantee you there are many studies that have been done. I have given an example of Melinda Lee Thompson's book, Holiness in Leviticus. It's a dissertation that was published in the year 2000. And so, if you also go to, I hope they have given you the link to the e-commons, the e-library at Aspen Theological Seminary. One of the blessings we've gotten because of that relationship, an MOU with Aspen Theological Seminary, that you can access. Did they give you that? Not yet. Not yet. Only students, it's only for faculty? Students that don't access it. Yeah. If you can get in there, you'll find a lot. So you can actually look for holiness in Leviticus. And just look through. These are materials you can download, you can print, you can also study and make your notes. A lot of literature has been done. Books, dissertations, theses that have been done on the book of Leviticus in relation to holiness. You can actually split the book into two major sections. The first section of this book, chapter 1 to chapter 10 of Leviticus, is talking about the way to the Holy One. Yeah? The way to the Holy One, meaning God, the Holy One of Israel. Chapters 11 to 27 is the way to holiness. And in this book, it sets all kinds of things related to worship, ministry, dedication of a national life, atonement, and there is something that is also, I think nearly all scholars agree that this is what is called the Holiness Code. Sharia Usu Takatifu. Don't forget this, and forget everything else about Leviticus. Remember this. The Holiness Code is found in Leviticus chapter 17 to Leviticus chapter 26. It sets rules and regulations that govern Israel's national life. And I will get deeper a bit into the Holiness Code before we break for chapel. But But I think what is very important is how important Leviticus is in what it says in Leviticus 19 verse 18. And it is within that holiness code, because the holiness code is in chapter what? 17 to 26. So these are chapters. But as you know, chapter 19 is in the middle of this. 19 verse 18 says, "Behold, for I am holy." This is a theme that First Peter picks it as it is. So, and this is one place I'll say, don't count the Old Testament to be just ritualistic and ceremonial holiness, that it didn't have anything to do with how to transform a human life. God expected his people, even in the Old Testament, to be holy, to be transformed within them and live a holy life. And that expectation was laid right in the middle of the holiness code, which is an extensive code. It covers from chapter 17 to 26, almost 10 chapters of regulations upon regulations. And you read them today. Actually, I took a bit of time just trying to look at what the holiness code is all about. And it is very, very, very extensive. It's John Oswald. John Oswald, who we were inquiring last time from listening to that video, who says that the Old Testament has a question. What was the question? How can a sinful man share their character of what we got? And the New Testament answer is the cross, the centrality of the cross. So Leviticus answers the question of how can only Yahweh share residence with sinful Israel. It illustrates sanctification of people and places. How do we know that? One of those is this verse we just read. Be holy because I am holy. Leviticus 19 verse 18. So that tabernacle then, that was in the presence of God's people, representing the presence of God, meant that the people that would accompany that tabernacle, the presence of God, would be a people who are also holy. So in a sense, even though the Old Testament asks a question of how can an unholy people live with a holy God, it doesn't quite says that the answer had to wait until the New Testament. That even within that Old Testament, they were expected to, in reality, live a holy life. So but then you can see the failure of the system as it were, the sacrificial system, the laws as they were given, because the impartation of that life was quite an issue in the Old Testament. So much to the extent that it tend to make the Old Testament look like it was more ceremonial, more following sets of laws. So much to the extent that our modern day Christianity would want to have nothing to do with the Old Testament. But really, the deeper you study the Old Testament, you would realize that God expected real transformation even for these people. So as much as it is raising a question that will find an ultimate answer in Jesus Christ, even then, there was a sense in which the people in the Old Testament did experience that transformative life. Now, it doesn't mean that their transformation is outside the cross of Jesus Christ. Those who are able to live a blameless and a holy life in the Old Testament were pointers, as it were, to the coming Christ. They were looking forward, so that ultimately all human redemption is on the basis of the cross of Jesus Christ. For us, we look back to the cross that not only saved us from the penalty of sin, but also sanctified us from the power and the grip of sin. We look backward to that work that was finished by Jesus Christ. For them, they were looking forward. And there is a way in which God was able to transform their lives as they look forward to Jesus Christ, who would offer his life. And there is so much that was not fully revealed even at that time, that now when we see them in the light of what happened at the cross, we begin to understand what was going on. So in Leviticus then, in fact, I think Leviticus has so many of these pointers, pointers to the cross, whether it is the sacrificial system, how we appropriate the blood of Jesus Christ and the ultimate sacrifice on the cross. You can see throughout the sacrificial system in Israel. In both the struggles, but also the order in which those sacrifices were made. So the priesthood and sacrificial system reveals that God is actually, there are a number of things that you look at the sacrificial system, you can spend some time there. One, in Leviticus, God is revealed as perfectly pure. That's why there is no doubt. You just see that God is revealing himself in Leviticus as perfectly pure. Secondly, it is also revealed in there that people are utterly sinful. They are so sinful. Number three, that sin is organic and contagious. So God is revealed as perfectly pure, but also that the people are completely sinful. But that is not also to say sinful in and of themselves individually, that the very same sin is contagious and organic. Number four is that sin always leads to death. And as you read through Leviticus and the penalties that God is revealing in there, you realize that sin ultimately leads to death. Number five, that God's presence does not tolerate sin. And I think even if you go to Exodus, taking you back in this place to holiness, in Exodus, you remember chapter 33 of Exodus, where my good friend Igame picks his song, Nendanas, Amaedanas. That song is picked from that chapter 3, where God had actually said, if I go with these people, I will destroy them in the wilderness. And so he purposed not to go with them. He said, I want to send an angel to go with you. And do you remember that God told them in Exodus 33 that if I go with you, I'll destroy you. So that point number 5 I'm trying to say here is that the presence of God does not tolerate sin. So with all this tabernacle, the Michigan, with the presence of God accompanying us, with the face of God looking at us with favor, it cannot be accompanied with sin. Number 6, God can sanctify the impure. I think that is revealed in the book of Leviticus very strongly, that God can actually sanctify the impure. And that God expects, I think this is number 7, God expects his people to be holy as he is holy. It is right there in the midst of the holiness code where it says, be holy, for I am holy. So this priestly sacrificial system explains both mechanics of temple rituals and the rationale for it. And the preamble to the holiness code is, be holy, for I am holy. Humans are invited to embody God's holy character and to bear his image. Again, the bearing of the image of God as holiness comes through as you look at the book of Leviticus. How do you, as an unholy human being, get there? So, those two. Now, the holiness code demonstrates to us a number of things. Holiness of God and his atonement. God's holiness is dangerous and should not be violated. The Holy of Holies could be entered by priests with care. That is in Exodus 28, verse 31 to 35. Atonement via sacrificial system was necessary. This is how Israel maintained their eligibility to be in God's presence. So all those sacrificial systems, atonement means being one with God, that your sin is taken care of. And that could happen only through the sacrificial system that Israel was able to maintain their eligibility to be in the presence of God. In essence, then, the sacrifice solved the sin guilt problem and restored the divine human relationship. That was what the sacrifice was intended to do. That is holiness and atonement. Holiness and judgment. God judges sin. The sacrifice takes the place of the sinner as demanded by God's holiness. That is what is called substitutionary atonement. That sin has to be judged. Sin has to be dealt with. Sin has to be punished. And somebody has to take that guilt instead of the sinner. God saves the sinner. When you talk about I am saved, sometimes the language of I am saved is not taken more deeply as it's supposed to be. When you really think about it, I am saved. It means I am spared. I could have carried the sin. I could have carried the penalty of that sin. So when you say I'm saved, you are saved because somebody, something happened to take away what you would have taken as your penalty. And you know, the born again language is, it looks like people are no longer giving those tests. Because everybody is a Christian. Even the worst thief in government is a Christian. But they didn't know that stealing and robbery and evil they have done has been taken over by someone else, that it is no longer counted in that. So when you say we are saved, we are truly saved. That somebody has taken your penalty. So it is called substitutionary atonement. It's a substitute that has taken over. So when the sinner is cleansed from sin, or a sin guilt, that is known as expiation. And I was not taking you above your heads, even those of you who have not had background in theology, that there are two things that happen in this substitutionary atonement. One is expiation. Expiation means you have been cleansed from sin guilt, that you are no longer guilty of your sin, right? But there is also something else that has to be satisfied during the process of atonement, and that is the wrath of God. The wrath of God being removed from facing any one of you, or as it were at that time, any one of the children of Israel, is and that is appeased. That's called appeasement, appeasing the wrath of God. Cleansing the sinner, removing the sin guilt is expiation. Removing the wrath of God is propitiation. So these two, that is expiation and propitiation, form what Israel understood as atonement. Kwamba hasira ya Mungu imeondolewa na ile kujisikia wewe ni guilty kwa sababu you've done something. Expiation is removed. That is atonement. And that substitutionary atonement did happen because of the sacrificial system. And when that has happened, we enter into that period of shalom. Peace. Peace with yourself and peace with God. Peace with yourself because you no longer carry the same guilt. Peace with God because of propitiation, that the wrath of God is no longer resting on you. And that is why in Israel, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur is a very important holiday. The Day of Atonement became the climax of Israel's sanctification theology. That is according to this gentleman, James L. Mays, that the Day of Atonement became the climax of Israel's sanctification theology. It marked the that period of salvation. You know where we get the word scapegoat? What is a scapegoat? I'm going to close there so that we'll take a break. I think they have some tea. I don't know whether for you. I know they have tea for me. Chapel, and we'll come back. I don't know what time they will tell us what time. But let's finish with the scapegoat. What is a scapegoat?
I think it is mentioned in the same book, the Leviticus, whereby a goat is considered to take away the sins of the people, and just left to go into the wilderness and take away the sins of the people. Yeah.
How do we use it now? That word now, scapegoat. So we are using it
as an excuse. It is being used as an excuse.
and then excuse. It's quite close to, whereby it's being used to take the blame, right? Not necessarily blame. It could be scapegoating. Is basically sacrificing. That's the origin of that word is in this sense, where that instead of you getting the wilderness or being drawn into the oblivion because of your sin, that quote disappeared with the sinless escape. That's where we get the scapegoat. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome those of you who have arrived. And we've just started, so we haven't gone too far. We should be able to catch up. But we're delighted you're here, and we will take a break.
just concerning about the Ten Commandments. I counted them, the larger number is directed to the horizontal part of it, and the vertical is just about forward. So I don't know why it's too much on the human being rather than.
I think there should have been balance or should have been more. Yeah, what do you think?
I was just asking myself right now, maybe because I don't know if I'm right, but maybe because I'm very close to my friends all the time, my neighbors. I have a lot of responsibility to them. Or so maybe I have a lot to do with them here. I don't know.
All of them are God's commandments. And while the past 4 relates with our relationship with God, our particular holiness, even the other, because in the middle also is interesting. It stands in the middle. The one with the promise is in relation to your parents. Yeah. It's right at the very beginning of it. It's like between God and the neighbors. It's your parents, and they are the only one with a promise. Powerful. Those of us who disrespect parents. But the way I look at it myself is there is no such thing as distinct horizontal holiness from vertical holiness. There is no lesser punishment for dishonoring commandment number 10 as commandment number 1. They are all a reflection of the character of God. You see what I mean? So even if the others were 20, they are not overweighing this other one. Because the other, even those 20 are intended to reflect the character of God. As we human beings relate with one another, as we reflect his character. So, whereas there could be a possibility too that because we're here with others more than, but again, even that theology is not good. To say we're here with others more than we are with God. You see the problem? I think it is only a point of distinction that the character of God that is in me, how do I relate to my God? The character, it's the same character of God of holiness which is in me. How do I relate with my parents and how do I relate with others? So you cannot put it into the scales and say these ones are more than these ones. When holiness comes, when that sanctified life is in us, it affects everything about us. And it shows itself in so many practical ways that are uncountable. That I believe even those 6 are not enough. In fact, the 10 Commandments don't quite talk so much about the environment, but also holiness and environment as you relate with others. There are many other things that you can only interpret that the totality of a holy life as it relates to so many other things. Well, my good friends, it is time to take a break. Excuse chapel is a room.
Allow me just to give a short answer to
yes.
That I agree with you, and also that the fact that the first laws are for man and God. So the fact that it came first, even though they are less, they came first. Meaning also the emphasis on the vertical.
Yes.
And then even though the horizontal one came with more, but it came second. So it can balance that. These ones are less, but came first. These ones are more, but came second.
I think you put it in a very nice way. That's true. It's because you cannot have the horizontal if you don't have the vertical. I've given illustration about Salvation Army. Salvation Army, their social agenda around the world. There's so many good things they do around the world was because of their sanctified life. It became as a holiness movement. But when you lose the particle, you lose the result. Thank you so much. Right? So, take a break. We'll see you when we come back. He will tell us when it's coming. What time? Two, the line.
We are invited to join us for chapel service. 3:30 or 30.
Nimepewa password ya
Hapa kuna nini? Walisawi.
Kama nani amesahau je, nimustopishie ama hajaset? Ndio alikuwa nataka nikustopishie ni kama sasa nilikuwa nasema ndio stop alafu ikikatika bila kusema.
I hope it has saved.
See to stop.